Okay friends, one of the first things we have to do to get started on our job is to safely raise and support the rear of the car so the wheels are off the ground. After that, remove all 5 of your lug nuts and then the wheel. Let's put some support underneath this control arm. Now that the wheel's off, we have a nice clear view of this area right here. Let's go ahead and remove this bolt. Be careful as you remove this. This could be under some pressure and it might potentially come out towards you. Now we're going to remove the through bolt that comes through the knuckle, through the shock, and then through the other side of the knuckle. We'll set this aside. Next, we're going to separate the shock from the knuckle. With this taken apart, just pay attention to the height that this control arm is sitting at. As you can tell, it's not necessarily sitting all the way down, so when we go ahead and put in the brand new one, we want to make sure that we have it at the approximate same level as this one right here. The next thing we're going to pay attention to is the inner bolt located right around here. Now to remove this, we're of course just going to start it with a ratchet, and then I'll have to get the rest out with a wrench. We're just going to take that rear shock and we're going to pull it right up like this. You might possibly need to go ahead and compress it first, but be careful when it decompresses. You don't want to damage your axle boot or of course your flex hose. Essentially, we just want to have enough room to be able to get our ratchet in here and remove this bolt. Let's go ahead and loosen this up. Okay, let's get that bolt out of there. Now looking up along the top here, you have easy access to all 3 of your mounting bolts for the upper bracket. You're going to have one bolt right here. There's another one located a little further inward, and then of course there'll be one towards the front of the car. We need to remove all 3 of those. Just keep in mind there isn't going to be anything holding the shock up after the third one's removed. Go ahead and put that in just a couple threads. Now we can continue on by removing our last bolt. Now with the unit out of the car, we're going to continue on by removing the mount right here. If you were to look at this, you can tell that it's definitely not perfectly straight up and down. So that's something that you're going to want to pay attention to. You can either use a crayon or something the like and kind of mark where you think the original area was. So when we put this back in, we can tighten it up to the same exact area. However you need to do it so you can remember exactly the angle that this is at. The way that I'm personally going to do it is just lay it down just like this. Now as I look along here, there's 2 areas on the bracket that hit directly up against the bench at the same time as the rest of my shock comes all the way down like this. This is pretty much going to help ensure that I have the right angle when I put in my brand new shock. Looking at this, you can tell it has a through bolt. It comes from one side, comes through to the other, and there's a nut. Let's go ahead and start removing this. Now it's going to be time to charge up our gas shock. What I mean by that is we need to carefully put it between our feet so it can't slip around. We'll gently press it down, remove this strap right here, and then we're going to let this fully decompress. After it's all the way up, we're going to press it down, let it come back up, and we'll repeat this process 3 to 5 times. Okay, now once we have the shock completely charged up, we can continue on by installing it into the upper bracket. So at this point, I'm just going to take the bracket, I'll line this up. We'll slide the shock right in there. Once it's in, take your mounting bolt, ensure that the threads are clean and free of any debris. This looks great. Go ahead and slide it right through here. Once we have it through, we'll add some thread locker. Now we can start the nut on there. The next thing you want to do is ensure that this is lined up with the original way it was. Just like I talked about earlier, you want to make sure that it's not perfectly straight because it won't fit in the car that way. And of course you can't have it off kilter like that. You want it to be at approximately the same angle as when you removed the original one. Just going to make sure that Both these areas are touching. This is going all the way down to the bench like it was before. This should get me pretty close to the angle that I need. Snug it up. Now we're going to torque this to 76 foot-pounds. Before we can continue on and put our shock inside the rear of the vehicle, of course you're going to want to make sure the threads of the bolts are nice and clean with some red thread locker. Also, the areas where the shock's going to be mounted to on the body of the car, ensure that it's nice and clean and free of debris. Let's carefully slide this in here. All right. Now I'm just going to compress the shock a little bit so I can get the angle I need to mount this. As you start lining up the bolts, go ahead and start them in there. Definitely don't tighten any of them up until you have them all started. Now that they're all started, let's go ahead and snug them up. The torque for these will be 35 foot-pounds. Okay, now it's time to get our rear upper control arm in here. We're going to carefully take this, we'll slide it right into where the bracket is on the subframe in the rear. We also have our bolt. Ensure that the threads are nice and clean, and of course put a little bit of red thread locker on there. We'll go ahead and slide this in behind that rear shock, start it in, we'll snug it up, and then we'll torque it to manufacturer's specification. All right, now before we go ahead and snug this up, we want to of course make sure that this upper control arm is in the same position as when we originally removed it. Once it's snug, torque it to 81 foot-pounds. The next thing we're going to do is start lining up the upper control arm with the knuckle. You might notice as you're trying to push to line it up, it's a little difficult. If you wanted to and you had access to one, you could use a ratchet strap, carefully put it along here, being very careful not to damage anything along the way, and just gently ratchet it in until it lines up with where it needs to be. Let's torque this to 81 foot-pounds as well. Now the next thing you're going to want to do is go ahead and get your jack out from underneath the control arm. We don't need that out there anymore. Let's continue on by putting our shock into the lower knuckle area here. Once you have that lined up, go ahead and put in your mounting bolt. Let's do that from the front towards the rear. Now we're going to put on our rubber vibration absorber here. Put on the nut. Now we can snug this up. Let's snug it up. Now we'll torque this to 85 foot-pounds. Just double check everything that you assembled, make sure everything's perfect. Then of course we'll get our wheel on here, start all of our lug nuts, get it on the ground, we'll snug it up and torque it to 100 foot-pounds. Torqued. Okay friends, so we got our rear shock in there. What's left to do now? You're going to do the exact same thing on the other side of the car. When you do one shock, you do them as a pair. After that, safely take it for a road test down to your local alignment shop.